for screen sharing. I got all PowerPointy on you. It's a very short PowerPoint. Be not dismayed.
Yeah, John, are you able to provide that, or Cindy?
Cindy, yeah, Cindy, I think.
Bev, let me just, before you jump in, we mentioned at the beginning, but we just thought it'd be good to take a short amount of time before we finish, considering that so much church has gone online, but also so much church is moving back into being in person, to just take a brief moment to talk about how we can consider the safety of our members. Many of us oversee ministries for minors. Some of us oversee ministries for seniors and everybody in between. So we invited our own beloved Pastor Bev to come and just give us some brief reminders, instruction on how we can keep members safe, and also about mandated reporting. So thank you so much, Pastor Bev, for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Yeah, and I think this is, we have a really unique work because we kind of have these really fine lines that we walk. We're caretakers, and a really big part of our job that I like to always remember is that no matter what, your job is to care for the most vulnerable. And of course, that includes our children, that includes our elderly, and anybody under the age of 18. So in particular and legally, those are some areas that we are going to address. In terms of safety, I've just got a short little PowerPoint here that I just want to share with you all. Let me know if this pops up for you here. Okay. I think that pops up. Okay. So hopefully, there we go. So just protecting the most vulnerable in our churches. So safety in your churches, what this means, or what it can mean, I think, is paying attention in particular to what your space looks like, and knowing who ought to be in those spaces. We love everyone, and we provide spaces for where they ought to be. And so appropriate gathering spaces for age-based ministries in particular, I think that's really important, unless of course it's a large church gathering, and then we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. But appropriate age gathering spaces, I think, are really important. Not only is that a safety precaution, but I also think it signals to your church members that you care, that they matter to you, and that you are being thoughtful about providing a space for them. It's kind of like when you have people over to your house, and you have cleaned up and you've prepared a meal. It's welcoming, it's purposeful, it's mindful. And so we do the same with our church spaces. Another thing that's really significant to our spaces, and part of what it means to pay attention, is also having background checks for all of the adults, everybody who's 18-year-old and up. And this is a no exception rule. This is really interesting. And the reason I say this is no exception, because sometimes we'll walk into churches and people will be like, oh yeah, but so-and-so has been here for so long. Fantastic. And I like you, and you're getting background checked if you're hanging out with kids under 18. And let me tell you, it's gonna make for some really tough conversations. I go through these conversations every year during VBS with my volunteers, and I tell people that I love them. I will continue to pray for them. They are not any less in my book, but if they're not going to abide by, these are conference rules actually, conference, not just guidelines. These aren't to be blurred. These are rules, and they have legal implications if something were to happen in your community. So this is a really important thing that I think a lot of the times we kind of blur the lines because we want to be nice. But what I try to tell people is, once we're in a place where somebody is no longer safe, we will regret thinking about being nice instead of being safe. This isn't a personal issue against you not being kind. In fact, you will feel much more I think secure in the work that you're called to do, because you are prioritizing safety over being nice. There are so many things that people can volunteer in and help in at the church, but if they're going to be working with anybody under the age of 18, a background check is mandatory, and we'll talk about 2 ways that you can do that. and know who is in your spaces. I like to do that by electronic check-in systems. And so this is something that's going to be kind of unique, I think, post-COVID, since we've kind of already had to do a little bit of an idea of who's been in our spaces. It's something that most churches will start to take a little bit of or maybe have less of a rough edge towards. A lot of people feel like it's very impersonal to check in and to have to know who's in your space. I think it's more personal, right? Like, you don't just let strangers walk into your house and you're like, oh, I don't know you, but I'm glad that you're here. It's really purposeful. I think it helps you actually pastor better because you're knowing who's in your space and you're getting to know them gradually. But it is also a safety issue or a safety precaution to know who's in your space, who is new, who has come off the streets, right? You'll know if something unique is going on or out of the ordinary, perhaps you could say. It's really helpful for you to know. In particular, this is significant when it comes to children and or youth spaces. If there's somebody in your community that walks in and they're not supposed to be there, you need to know that. And by having a check-in system or some way of kind of taking attendance and knowing who's in your space, I think that helps kind of address that issue. And the last thing is you need to have a plan, whether that's for earthquakes, exiting spaces, emergencies, so that your kids of any kind of emergency, right? So your kids and volunteers know where to go. You need to run drills at least twice a year. We've gone as far as running drills for in case there is an active shooter, because we at Gloucester University Church, we're right next to a university campus. And unfortunately, it's a reality that we live in. So we have created some drills. And I think that these are important for you to do as a church, as a local church, and to think about what are our priorities, what are some ways what's the uniqueness of our context, and what are emergency spaces that are going to be helpful for our kids. Our kids need to know where to go, and your volunteers need to know where to go, because in an emergency, everybody loses their logic. And so when you practice it, it's just automatic. There's no question about it. You just go to a designated space, and this is how people can find each other in times of emergencies. And you live in California, and we have earthquakes, praise God. All right, so check-in systems for areas. An example of this option is something called Planning Center Online. There's a lot of options, my friends. So I just want to, this is just an example of one. But Planning Center Online, it's actually a comprehensive church check-in system. So if you were looking to adopt one for the entirety of your church, and maybe many of you are already familiar with this, but it does have children and youth options. We actually have switched over to it and use it for everything, including VBS and everything on the weekends. And it's really helpful. You get to send members email updates. You get to keep people's information updated. So it does much more than just knowing who's in your space. It helps you continue to stay connected, which I think is a huge part of the work that we do. Or another option is to have a check-in sheet or something regular for your children and youth spaces. And remembering that when those children are on your campus, you are responsible for them, because they are coming in and people are trusting, families are trusting that you're providing a safe space. So it's also helpful to make sure that you're training your volunteers to know that that the kids that are being dropped off or left in your space. Right now, we're in a unique time because of COVID situations, but so families are going to be kind of podded together. They're in family pods, but on regular days or regular weekends, your children are just going to be dropped off, or youth are just going to be dropped off. And again, this comes with like this old school confidence that, you know, it's church, people don't steal children, nobody's abducted here. And I want to, if that is your mindset, I want to give you a really huge hug, and I just want to pull you into the 21st century, and life happens. So the reality is that we want to watch, if our kid is coming into our space, we want to make sure that they're leaving with the right human that brought them into that space. And then after that, you get to walk away and say, we gave you your child. That was my commitment to you. And the other thing was communicate with your families of what your protocols are. I know this might feel like a really basic idea, but it is huge. Communication is everything. Communication is the way that your families will learn to trust you and you can learn to trust them. And it helps everybody stay on the same page so there's no surprises. This is huge in terms of safety, because then somebody comes up with an idea, nobody knows protocol, and then again, you have another kind of chaotic disaster. And the other part is to just be consistent and make sure that you have volunteers that you're training in your process, whatever your process is, that you have volunteers that know what it is. That you're not hoarding the information or assuming that because it makes sense to you and you thought about it last night and for the last week, that everybody was in your brain and now they know things. We're not telepathic. Please tell your people, write it on a piece of paper, send it on an email, print it on a poster, slap it all over the place. It's a deal. Appropriate spaces. So this is one of the other things that we talked about. Each group ought to gather in their designated spaces. So all spaces too, as we think about those spaces, they need to have all of the doors, including your office. If you don't already have this, I would ask, if you're the lead pastor, do it. If you're an associate, please work with your lead pastor. All of your office doors ought to have windows in them. You see John's there, and everyone needs at least a door. This is a safety precaution, in the same way that we don't leave volunteers, any adult volunteers with anybody under the age of 18 in a room alone by themselves, right? Pastor Aaron, we love him so much, and I would still not leave him with a youth by himself. That is for the safety of the youth, and that is for the safety of Pastor Aaron. What we want to do is always have either another adult, whether that's a parent or another volunteer, and that should just be your standard. Just kind of, think back to when you were in elementary school or high school, the buddy system, 100%. It is about safety. And when things happen, it helps have an accountability partner. It helps have somebody there on the scene with you. If there's an emergency that goes outside of your ability to attend to, then you have another helper. And then no one under the age of 18, oh, we already said that part, but each group to gather in their designated spaces. I think this one is kind of goes hand in hand with adults who are not cleared to volunteer in your spaces, or if they don't have children or youth in the spaces that they're in, they need to be kindly escorted to other spaces where only adults are gathering. This is huge. Again, I see this a ton, especially I grew up in Spanish church, so I feel very available and able to say this. Sociedad de Jóvenes, right? Youth ministries, it's supposed to be for youth, except it was Sociedad de Jóvenes in Spanish churches is from like 0 to 105. And that's great, except for, right, like whatever your programming is. We're not even going to talk about programming, but when you come into spaces, if they're not actually there with a child, they don't actually need to be there. Part of what we do as pastors is we attend to people's needs. And that can be saying, if there's somebody who walks in and they're a college student, unless they're volunteering and they have been cleared to volunteer in your spaces, then they can't be in those spaces with, the junior high students or one other or whatever it is. Unfortunately, we have too many situations in churches where we have seen friendships develop into other things between minors and adults, and it's just not appropriate. And this is how those things start to happen. And I think this kind of feels a little bit uncomfortable because we want to think the best of people. We never want to think about the worst. So I often tell people, if you go this route, then you never have to set people up for vulnerabilities and for yourself to have those conversations and then have to attend to those vulnerabilities. Background check options. We have a couple. We have one through the conference that is called Protect My Ministry. This is through the HR department that you are likely becoming very familiar with. Any and all of your volunteers and even local hires have to fill out a paperwork, and then the conference sends that out to do a background check. There is a small fee per volunteer and background check. It is, I'm not really sure. I was calling earlier this afternoon and I couldn't get through to somebody. It's pretty minimal, but you only have to pay it. I believe it's every 3 years now. It used to be every 2, but I believe it's every 3 years. And then your person is cleared for about 2 to 3 years. And if you don't have the budget for it, I will give you my cell phone, call me, and I will sponsor the people that need to get background checked. It's how passionate I am about how important this is. And then there's also Sterling Volunteers. This is through the NAD. This is something that you will also see kind of familiar in our spaces. And it's something that you will see that's pretty common in our academies. So our academies use this for all of their teachers, and any parents who want to volunteer on campus actually have to go through Sterling Volunteers, and they actually have to get fingerprinted. If you're all about it, go big or go home. You know, praise God, you can do it. It's not mandatory for our churches to get fingerprinted, but if you want to go that route, you have the option to do that. And you know your community the best and what could be a good fit. And if your budget is available for that, you can do that too. And I did want to mention that parent and staff who are cleared through this program, they are allowed to volunteer at your church as long as they provide some sort of proof that they have been cleared through Sterling Volunteers. This happened to me last year. I had a lot of parents who were just like, I already got cleared. And this laborious exhaustion of being background checked. I had to remind people that I'm doing this for the safety of all of their children. But you will get people who are exhausted by the process. But we did double check with HR, and people who are cleared through Sterling Volunteer can continue to volunteer at your church. We just need to make sure that we provide and have some sort of proof and documentation that happened. Okay, so that is that there, and that is kind of those portions about physical safety. The most important thing that I can stress is pay attention to your space. As you're walking around your church, I think a lot of the times we kind of get into the groove of the mundane and we stop paying attention. But above all of those things that we listed, pay attention to what your rooms look like, pay attention to the people that are coming in and out of your spaces. It's a huge part of what it means to be a safe community, is getting to know the people that are in your spaces. A lot of stuff can happen without your knowledge if you're not familiar with the spaces or the community that you're surrounded by. And then I invite you to bring your deacons in, or to bring your lead volunteers into that same practice. I've got like a small circle of people who will text me and or email me if it's not urgent, but will let me know, hey, this is, we have even a protocol for new people, not because we're trying to flag them down and like tackle them before church ends, but because we want to get to know them and we want to stay connected to them as well. But anytime there's something that is completely out of the normal, what we would consider normal, what's not common around our community, then we have given out our cell phone numbers so that our volunteers know that we're available to be able to attend to any number of those things. We also have something called a safety committee. And I'm not sure all churches have this, but I know that it's one of the best things that we have been able to do. That safety committee is in charge of actually putting together our earthquake, backup plan, our exit plans, our in case there's a shooter on campus plan, if there is a fire, whatever plan that it is, we have actually a subcommittee that attends to that. So I would invite you to think about that. If you'd like some sort of, outline, a rubric for what that looks like, it's actually Steve's area, Steve Hemingway, who is our our director of finances and admin. And we can get you a copy of that, and we're happy to help you start thinking about that. But I do think it's one way for you to also delegate. You don't have to do all of the things. Definitely lean on your church members. They're there. This is part of doing community, and putting more heads together to think about the safety of your community is one of the wisest things that you can do. And then last, in terms of mandated reporting, there's a question here. Let me see what it says. How do we reach you? I will drop my email for you all, and then you can let me know, and we'll get you some more info, or you can reach me through Pastor Aaron or Pastor John. Okay, so you shared actually a really great resource with me. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that up here in just a second, about mandated reporting. Mandated reporting is about reporting abuse, in particular for anybody who is under the age of 18. Who is a mandated reporter? everybody, all of you, not just because you're a children's pastor or because you're a youth pastor, but because you work at a local church and you will be in proximity to children or youth. So that makes all of you mandated reporters. And I think this is really helpful to know. I think that it's something that I sit down and personally brief the youth pastor that's in my space, because we have had incidents and things that have come up. But here's a page that actually, Pastor Aaron, that you shared with me, that I actually think is really helpful and pretty comprehensive in terms of what to know. And this is great because it pertains in particular to the responsibilities in the state of California. One thing that's kind of interesting is that as you move from state to state, some of the laws are a little bit different when it comes to some of these things. But here is what you should know. So we'll send you this link as well. I think Pastor Aaron, you probably already sent this to everybody, but anyways, this is a really great, it gives you super quick nuggets of what it means to be a mandated reporter. And so here are some of the things that you'll really want to pay attention to, is if a child is physically injured, and it's not by accidental means, if a child is subjected to willful cruelty, unjustifiable punishment, if a child is abused or exploited sexually, a child is neglected by a parent or a caretaker, fails to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision. This is such an interesting thing here. And I think it kind of, when I read this a while back, or when I first started in children's ministry, I was super intimidated by this little list here, because then I'm like, well, how do you know if somebody was physically injured and it wasn't an accident? And this kind of goes back to paying attention to your members. Children in particular are really unique in that they will let us know, actually all humans actually will let us know by a change in their behavior. Children start to shut down when there is something really significant or traumatic happening in their life. And so getting to know the people in your community will help you know when they have a really huge shift in their behavior, in their personality. When a child is no longer, high-fiving you or afraid to high-five you because their ribs hurt, or they're walking around with a limp, or they have dark circles under their eyes, or things that are not common. Again, you're looking not for normal. I don't actually really appreciate the word normal because it doesn't really help us identify, but what is common to this child. When those things start to shift significantly, that's when we want to get worried. And this word child, I think, is helpful to pay attention to with youth. So preteens, teenagers, even up to the age of 18. I think it's really helpful, even though once they're 18, they are able to make their own claims themselves, to legal claims anyways, against somebody who has caused them harm. And this is also helpful in terms of elderly abuse and or somebody who is experiencing maltreatment with an elderly person. So here are other friends in the community of mandated reporters that is helpful for you to know. Here's our awesome little church sign, us amongst the priests, the rabbis, and all religious practitioners, and in this organizational kind of work that we do. So how do we report suspected child neglect and abuse? In an emergency, if a child is seriously injured and or needs immediate care, call 911. Don't think about it. Don't, I think if this is one of those things, your immediate response, just call 911, and then that actually releases you. They will actually take care of everything once the child is at the hospital. They have social workers, and then that will go ahead and launch care for the child. However, if you have a suspicion or something that might be going on that you think is worth reporting, or you have a feeling about something, that is something that you can call your county department. There are hotlines. You can call the police station, you can call the sheriff's department, and you can make a report. And these are some helpful areas to know, to make sure that you have kind of a date or a description of injuries, right? Whether you know information about the predator or the person who has hurt the child, if you know the location of the child, all of those things are mandated reporting. And these are some of the ways that you can, this is a great PDF to kind of keep on tab, so that if you're ever in a pinch, you can go back and say, okay, this is what happened. And then here is another site to go on if you want to learn just a little bit more behind that. And then number 3, which I think is really important, is understanding your legal protections. And so reporting something does not necessarily bind you to having to go through everything. You don't become a social worker when you report. Okay, I think this is really important. And in terms of reporting, you don't need to investigate whether everything is true or not. You don't need to investigate all of the steps for the process. You are simply a connector for a resource. And so I think a lot of the times and conversations that I've had with colleagues in the past has been a sense of hesitancy. Well, I'm not really sure, like this kid's pretty clumsy, so they kind of have bruises all of the time. Lean into that thing in your gut. I'm not talking about the sound after you eat, like, you know, jalapenos. I'm talking about like the thing in your gut that tells you that something is wrong. Lean into that. And once you make that call, CPS will handle the rest. In fact, they're anonymous calls unless you want to be self-identified, but anonymous calls so that you can continue the relationships in your church and your community. But again, you want to err on the side of caution. And if it's nothing and they don't need, if it's not something that needs to be attended to, then the social worker will figure it out. But what we don't want to do is sit on something because just in case we might be wrong, because the worst thing that could happen is you might be right. And if a child is in danger, we would hate for that to continue to happen to that child and then eventually end in a fatality, which does happen. And that leads me to kind of this next portion and talking about abuse in our communities. One of the most important things I think is when somebody tells you that they're in danger or that they're being abused or something is happening to them, I want to invite you to believe them. And not to dig into your stories of NPR and this one time you heard this one person say something. It's pay attention, be present with them, believe them, and then do the work of reporting what you need to report, especially if it's a child and or a youth in your community. Another thing that's really important is we do practice confidentiality in our pastoral care and in our pastoral conversations with kids. I always tell children and or kids that come into my office, we're gonna have a conversation and thank you for trusting me with your story. And I need to tell you something that's really important, that's also a part of my job, is that if at any point in time I hear that you are in danger, whether that's somebody that might be hurting you or that you might be a danger to yourself and you might want to hurt yourself, I have to connect you with somebody who can help you. So what that looks like, of course, it's looking for, like if a kid says, I'm so upset, you know, in youth ministries, I'm so upset, I just want to kill myself. That's not a means to call CPS. You are practicing more listening and saying, tell me more about that feeling. If then the kid tells you that they have a plan and a means to do it, that's when you call CPS. That's when you get extra help, right? If they say, oh, I want to kill myself and I found my dad's gun and I know it's in the attic and I'm going to do it tomorrow after school. That's an immediate call to CPS. That's an immediate call and reach out, right? Oh, I want to kill myself. I think I'm just going to stay in my room for the next 5 hours. Is not the same thing as I want to kill myself and I'm going to go find my dad's gun and I'm going to do it after school tomorrow, right? Those are very different. So just kind of use your intuitive self. And if you're feeling nervous about anything, please reach out to any of us, and I'm happy to talk through stuff. I've talked through plenty of different situations for pastors who have found themselves in a moment and it's been a little bit funky. Another thing that might pop up that we didn't really talk about here, there's so many different avenues to what it means to be a mandated reporter, but one that's a little bit more common is what we talked about a little bit earlier, is in our youth ministries, when we have 15-year-olds who happen to be super in love with a 19-year-old. And I'm so excited that love has found you too. And if I find out that you're sexually active, I have to report that, because it is sexual. It's a sexual encounter with a minor. And as much as I love those two humans so much, legally, a 15-year-old, even if they give consent, cannot be sexually active with a 19-year-old. And the 19-year-old needs to understand the implications of this. We go through this kind of talk and these kinds of trainings with all of our youth, especially during VBS, because they are really in close proximities to all of our children. So most of our youth have gotten the talk. The moment that you turn 18, there are legal implications to the kinds of relationships that you will develop. And so we have to be mindful. We're not trying to scare anybody. We're trying to help them understand the responsibilities and the powers that they hold. And so again, developmentally, a 15-year-old from a 19-year-old is very, very different. And legally, what that could look like and the kinds of stories that could unravel, all under, the notion of love, it just gets translated very different. So those have been some of the cases where even ourselves at La Sierra, we've had to walk through a really difficult journey with the family and a kid. I think this was a really fine line. Somebody had turned 18 and the person was 17. And we were just like, again, we like you all so much. And the moment that you turn 18, more power to you. But when you're in this space, this is what our responsibilities are, and communicating that to the parents as well. So I think that's really, really important. And last, I'm just going to share this for the sake of you having another resource about understanding what abuse looks like. And abuse is something that is actually very common, unfortunately, between spouses in Christian communities and Adventists. And I think that, again, we want to believe that people are good. And on the outside, people carry themselves very well. Some people with the most educated and beautiful backgrounds and all sorts of things have been found to be, abusers in their home. So nobody is necessarily safe or not a possible predator and or a person who could cause harm. And I think that's really important to remember. I just wanted to share this website. It is the End It Now. And this was the virtual summit from last year, which I think is super worth your time. This one here, the Church Toolkit, is a really helpful walkthrough of understanding, especially battered women, which is more common, even though there are lots of men, a pretty significant percentage of men that are also experience abuse from either their spouse or somebody else. It's a lot less reported, but again, what we do is we pay attention. And most of the times we can't, one of the interesting things about knowing if somebody is going or experiencing abuse at home as an adult, you cannot call CPS. They actually have to be the ones to report, and they have to be the ones to reach out. However, you can be a person to make those connections and provide a safe place for, or getting them connected to a safe house, or getting them connected to a social worker, or getting them connected to the police department if they don't have the means to do that in their own home. But there are definitely several different videos that I think are worth watching and taking the time to listen to. That one that I had, the Church Toolkit, it has quite a few narratives from survivors and their experience with abuse. And the most significant thing I think that happens is that we learn to believe people when they tell us that they need help. and not to sit there and to itemize it and to figure out if it's worth it. One of the stories, if you go back and listen to this video, is a woman says to her pastor, my husband is beating me. And there are certain times where I get tied up, and she starts telling them, this pastor, and the pastor says, that doesn't really sound like your husband. That's not pretty typical. Like, he never curses. I've never seen him curse before. I can't imagine that he would do something like this. You know, you are not American Idol judge. You are a pastor, and you are not there to try to put puzzles together and to clue if somebody says that they need help. Asking for help when you're an abuse victim is one of the most difficult things that people can do. So please believe them, and then reach out for a list of resources. We keep a list of resources in case anything happens at our church, and I'm happy to share that. I can send those links and lists to Aaron. Those are, and they might be a little bit different if you're not in like the Inland Empire, specifically in like Riverside or Loma Linda, but there are safe houses within different communities that I think it's really helpful that you get acquainted with. And safe houses are meant to be places where abuse victims are able to go securely without anybody else knowing. Something to know about those safe houses, they have to call. You can't call. I can't be like, hey, this is Pastor Bev at La Sierra, and you know, so-and-so is in my office. They will say, thank you so much for calling. They need to call in themselves, and we need to get the actual information. There's information that the location has to give them that they can't give to you because it's so private and it's so secure. So anyways, okay, I think that's the spiel. That's all I have for you. Any questions? There's so much within this topic. So and it's very heavy too, and it's very difficult, but I think those are a few kind of nuggets that I think can be really, really helpful to begin with as you start working in your communities.
Thank you so much, Bev. Because of the time, I'll just ask if you could leave your email, if you don't mind. And if you have a question for Bev or want to extend the conversation, I know she's happy to have you do that. Of course, you can reach out to the youth department as well, or the HR department. But Bev, this has been extremely, extremely helpful and informative, and obviously such an important topic. We did put the link to that document from the Social Services Department for the state of California in the chat, as well as the End It Now North America link. You can also find these things on our SECC Youth website on a link called Ministry Support on the resources page. But please feel free to reach out, because obviously this is a hugely important topic. So thank you, Pastor Bev, so very much.
Absolutely. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Appreciate it.